to begin today, we have the honor of having Tristan Bekinschtein, which I have the pleasure to know already back from Argentina from my very early steps in the world of neuroscience. And Tristan is the director of the Consciousness and Cognition Lab in the Department of Psychology of the University of Cambridge. So Tristan, whenever you want, the audience is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me well. There's apparently 223 of you, and numbers going up, which is a bit scary because I only see a few friends and none of you. But hopefully you're okay in your house and you are prepared to have a dual task of watching me and listening to me and then answering your emails and tweeting about it and whatever you do. I cannot control. Yes, I will position myself in the predictive processes area. I will, sometimes say I do some statistical learning, but not really. But we will have a discussion about it later, whatever that exactly means and what is the relationship between it. What I wanted to tell you today about is this explicit and implicit auditory predictions of sounds and silence, and tell you effectively that this is a second line of work in the lab. The Conscious and Cognition Lab works a lot on neuroscience of consciousness and transitions between different states, but we won't talk about that today. We're going to talk about something I started in my first postdoc in 2007, and continue for the up until now. I'm going to share a few results from this week too, if I have time in the next 27 minutes. What I wanted to tell you, it's mainly about this idea of that I want to be using attention as an idea of very simple. So what are you paying attention to? Prediction in the widest sense of brain processes as the neural signature of the external information that can be predicted, explicit or implicit. But there's also the internal information that can be predicted, because we in predictive process, we might have a hierarchy. An expectation, and I'm separating expectation as in the idea of conscious expectation. The idea that to expect something, at least in the experimental design we sort of defined a few years back, and lately it looks like you need some, the aspect of expectation, this long-term expectation of what is coming. You need some degree of consciousness to be able to capture that long-term prediction. So I'm going to be introducing the specific experimental design, the classic one, what is called the global local. I'll show you in a second. I will talk a little bit about how the attention modulates different things. For example, modulates what you get from the information depending on what you're actually doing, even if the information that you're getting from the auditory system is different. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the hierarchy of predicting nothing. So when you hear a silence and you expected that silence or didn't expect that silence, and then I'm going to show you a little bit, just a final aspect of how we link motor predictions, actual direct explicit motor predictions to these sort of automatic or not so automatic auditory predictions. So these are the 18 slides you're going to see today, and that hopefully prompts you to go and prepare a tea and say, okay, I've seen most of the talk in the first 2 minutes, so everything's fine. I'll watch it later when it's recorded, the part I like. As you can see, in fact, it's not even 18. We're already here, so we have only these ones to watch: experimental design, results, theory, framework, results, some summary. Hopefully we can cover that in 22 minutes from now. So let's talk about a little bit about the historical global local, the thing I sort of started to discuss many years ago when I visited Paris in 2006. And then we were having a coffee and then a beer with Lionel Nakash and Stan Hen, and at the time Marianne Sigmund. and we discussed an idea of trying to capture two classic brain markers of target detection, or oddballs, that they call it. One is called the mismatch, the other one is called the P3, but really they don't matter too much in themselves. What it matters is that we create a sequence of sounds that can capture several layers of the predictive processes. So what I mean by this, and if you never seen the global lookup before, I don't blame you, even if it's old. You don't have to read all the literature, and also it's a bit boring. But I'll sing it to you because that one was supposed to do, and also because it's recorded and 200 people watching, I should sing it. So this is how roughly you get the task when you come to do the task in the lab. Okay, guys, this is a task. It's going to be 3 minutes. You're going to hear a series of sounds, and I want you to notice what is different. That's the actual only thing we tell the participants. There might be something different. You will hear a stream of sounds, and if something will change, I want you to count that change, and then continue counting until the 3 minutes are finished. So this is the classic pay attention to the task version. And then the people sit down, close their eyes, EEG on, put the headphones, and they hear beep 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 beep, and then it goes like that. So we have one type of block, which is 3 minutes, which you hear this 5 sounds, a sequence of 5, with a little variable, silence in between, and they feel rhythmic, but they're not truly rhythmic because it's a lot of jitter there. So if you're a musician, you feel that something is off, so you keep on trying to make sense of it. So you keep the attention to it, and it's also not really like PPPPP. It's a blasting system. It really blasts the auditory cortex, and sometimes you get a violation at the end of that particular sequence, the beep 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 boop. And of course, the neural system just blows, the moment they hear something different. We know this from, insects to humans, what is called detection of a difference. Now, that's the first block, and it's easy to get what's going on. 20% of time, you're going to get a beep, 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 boop. So there you go. That's the difference. Count that. Now, the next block is the key factor. Now, your continuous sequences are beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop. And sometimes the deviant one, or the not so classic one, statistically you could get this one in a lower proportion. You get the beep, 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 beep. So now these 5 sounds are all the same, but they violate the sequence of the other one. So you get beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop, beep, 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 boop. So if you're paying attention, you get that. If you're not paying attention, you cannot count that because you are not paying attention, but also your brain registers differently. And that's what we did here. So if you're measuring the EEG and you hear the beep, 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 the beep, 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 so you get the N ones, the actual neural markers of that, very, very, very clearly. And then you get the difference between the boop and the beep. That's the auditory physical difference, and this is called a mismatch. It's a mismatch of the sound, and it's a negativity mismatch, or mismatch negativity. Defined 55 or 50 years ago. But what it matters is that we get this very, very, very obvious classic neural marker for our violation between one sequence and the other sequence. Now, if I go back and take everything that is 20%, let's say everything that is deviant. So you say 20% here, 20% here, everything that is standard. And I compare the standards, which have a proportion of this and a proportion of that, and the deviants that have a proportion of this and proportion of that. I get I contrast those, and I get what is called a pure global effect. So now I have a neural marker that doesn't have the local marker directly, although it depends on it. I have this sort of P3, which is an attentional P3, because we know it actually goes down if we don't pay attention. So I'm going to show you. I'll show you this very clearly. So you get the mismatch, and this is another depiction of the mismatch in itself. If you're paying attention, you get a mismatch, and you get this sort of this local effect. and you get this global effect. You get a brain activity that is sustained when you were paying attention. And that contrast is the global effect. When you compare things that are, the only difference is how frequent they are, not what they are. This is what we call a third level abstract rule. If you, as I tell you, listen to the sounds, but don't worry, they're just to test your audition. You don't need to do nothing. You don't need to do anything with this. Then you don't get the P300. You don't get this global effect. In green is low. Now, if I ask you, and this is another group of people, to pay attention to a visual task, a demanded visual task, where there are X's and O's and T's in colors, you gotta really attention to a visual task. Then again, I do get the local effect, but I don't get the global effect, and that's what I was trying to sort of show you here. If you do the fMRI in the local effect, you get the auditory, and extended cortices. If you do the global effect, you get, much wider, activity. And you can get that in source, in MEG, EEG, in fMRI, or in intracranial data. Which it takes me to the idea that, okay, what's the framework for this very simple, allegedly simple task where you captures attention, prediction? So the classic framework that you're all here for, for this framework, or at least to criticize it or to agree with it, is the predictive coding, the hierarchical predictive coding models. And hopefully we'll have a good discussion about this. So what we would say in the predictive classic models is, it's the brain is not passive, right? The brain is a machine that is continuously active, expecting something to happen, even if you're just the best Buddha in the world. And you put your mind in complete blank, you still expect the mind to be blank. So the underlying idea that the system is active all the time. It doesn't matter what it is. The only moment it's not active is when you're fully comatose, and even so we could discuss, or when you are like completely deeply sedated. But any other moment, you are expecting something to happen with a wide or a narrow expectation, but you're something to happen automatically, consciously, unconsciously. So it's a game, when information comes through, it's a game between what you're expecting in the conscious and unconscious sense, and in the neural processes sense, and the evidence that that you get, the evidence through the input of the auditory system in this case, and also eventually the evidence created by your own brain, because you have a mental set. If I ask you to do something, you're going to be waiting, hoping to get that that particular target in this case. And also, the nugget, the simplest aspect of a predictive coding model that we work with, and also mathematically, as I'll show you later, it's the idea that you have an input, and there's a prediction from a higher level, in the hierarchy, in the brain in our case, which sort of signals what you're waiting for, and then you get the input, and that's what we usually call the prediction error. So the relationship between the prediction and prediction error is, in the end, what we capture in this sort of framework. But there is a bit more to that, and it can be defined in a Bayesian manner, and it can be defined for learning. It can be defined for simple things like target detection. So when we talk about attention, expectation, and prediction, when we talk about attention, we usually talk about the precision of the system that is influenced, by different aspects. But the precision is something which is going to come back at the end when we say, okay, if you're paying attention, what is the brain doing? It's creating, further precision on the relationship between the prediction and prediction error, or you're just, sharpening, your prediction. So we'll see about that later. And finally, as I said before, it's a hierarchical organization. So in order to define the hierarchy for these results, let's define it in brain terms. So the first part of hierarchy I told you about was the mismatch, this local effect, which is this negativity, and it's modulated by you paying attention, not paying attention, but it still is always there. Then you have the P300, this global effect that is sustained and longer in time, several hundred milliseconds, and it's very much modulated by attention. If you don't pay attention, boom, no P300. no detectable P300, in EEG at least. And then you have another layer, which is a layer that is more related to finally the actual expectation, which is something like a slow drift. And I'll slowly, I'll tell you later. But it's the one that we think it's capturing the longer idea of the rule that we are capturing. So when you hear in beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, to capture that beep 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 beep, you're sort of capturing what's going on before. You're capturing that there is a sequence with violation, a sequence violation, a sequence violation, and somehow you're expecting something to come. And that slow drift is what might capture the expectation. Again, the CMB is an old signal, but it hasn't been used in this manner. So, second version of the global local. I'll show you one more. The second version of the global local, it's very similar to that one, and the subtle details don't matter. What it matters is now, instead of having one violation, which is the beep 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 boop, that violation, different sound, different frequency of the sound, we can have a violation that it's a different type of sound, beep 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 boop, or we can have the same sound, beep 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 beep, in the other ear. That's a location violation. Or you can have a location and tone violation. So when you hear beep 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 boop in the other ear, what we expect, and it's been shown in other oddball paradigms, you get a stronger first level, local hierarchical prediction error, or a stronger mismatch, if you want to think about it. And why I'm telling you this is because I wanted to tell you about the experiment that we ran with Shrivas many years ago. It was published in 2013. This is for the next experiment, where you can compare the single violation, the BBBBB against the BBBB boop, which is what we call single violation, and against the double violation, the one that it requires BBBB boop, and then in the other side. So you can have an ether oral versus mono-oral violation. That's the first thing. And the other interesting thing of these results is that we ask a group of people to pay attention to the sequences, like before, count something that is different. You're going to hear a series of sequences of sounds. They count when the one is different. The people do it, paying attention, counting sequences. And another group of people, we ask them to listen to the sounds, listen to the tones very, very clearly. And if you hear a tone changes, count that tone that changes. So now the people are either concentrating on the change in the tone or concentrating in the structure of the sequences. But what this group of sequences or this group of tone, oddballs are doing is different. What they're hearing is the same. Okay? So the only thing that changes is the top-down expectations of the action you're supposed to perform in your mind. There's no button press on anything. So now, when you pay attention to the sequences, you get these P300s, or these globals, between the interoral and the monooral. And you get this one when you attend the tones. So by eye, you can see the difference. If I compare them directly, I see a difference now that the attention of the tones happens faster and slightly stronger than the attention to sequences. That's the first thing. So that now we have a little sort of subtlety. It's a very strong effect, but it's a subtlety about how the second level of the prediction, not the mismatch, the P300, the global, it's modulated by what you are doing, not by the external world, but what you are doing, what we told you to do. And it's a very subtle difference. Of course, if the people are doing another task, there are no differences because there is no P300. So that's one thing, modulation of the precision by the type of attention. And the other second part I wanted to tell you about of this experiment is this particular CMV, or slow drift, or slow change, the gaining of the information. It could be construed as an evidence accumulation of the evidence that accumulates towards a violation. So if you hear in beep 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 beep, the fourth time you hear the beep 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 beep, is very clear it's very, very likely that a beep, 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 boop is going to come, right? So when you hear beep, 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 boop, and your first beep, 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 you rest. Beep, 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 or maybe it comes. Beep, 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 oh, sure, it's coming. Beep, 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 oh, it must come in next one. Beep, 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 boop, ah. So that's the release of the tension, the terrible tension that the people feel when they're doing this task. That is signaled by this CNV, this brain activity. And this is for sequences, and this is for tones. And what happens between sequences and tones is interesting, because if I compare the first time you hear beep, 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 beep versus the fourth time, where you're almost sure this is going to come because you've been waiting, beep, 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 then you get these two drifts. You get a higher drift for the late one, the one that comes, almost before, the last one. Of course, you don't know when the deviant is coming. It could be after 2, it could be after 3, it could be after 4, it could be after 5. So you really don't know, but the expectation is mounting. And that's how we measure it, how it changes. And what is interesting is there is a difference between late and early when you pay attention to the sequences. But when you only pay attention to the tones, you still have a drift here, but there are no differences between the first and the fourth. So it's a general expectation that you're waiting to hear a difference, but it doesn't seem that you're counting, or accumulating the evidence in the long run. You're just waiting for something different, but you're not expecting in a clear manner, in an evidence accumulation manner, what is going to be different. So that's the second part of of results. The next one, and that's I'm gonna hopefully fly on this one because it's much easier to capture. Now you've seen the global local. The third version of the global local, which is another Schreber's version, is the one that has a silence. So now you can hear beep 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 boop, 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 beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, beep beep beep. So the point here is that now you expected something to happen, either a deviant or a standard, but now your deviant is silence. Why we wanted this? Because now we have a brain activity to a pure expectation. There was no sound, but you still have this sort of weird, anguish as a person who plays drums. If I hear a silence, I know I create a little bit of anguish in the silence. And in music is very common because you could be doing and the people feel like, oh, what's coming? So they use that to change, the tones of the rhythm. So this is a very basic aspect of, this idea of silent expectations. And what we got there is something that's been shown before. And if you're paying attention, you get a difference between the control omission, the control silence, and the actual silence that happened within something you expected. And you get a classic difference. And even you get it, even if you are attending to a visual task. So now you're not paying attention, but the silence is encoded automatically in your brain anyway. So you can see the brain activity that you detected the silence, even if you were not paying attention. So what we did with this is the opportunity to do some funky modeling. And for this, we use the nicely and robust proven modeling technique called dynamical causal modeling, which the aim is to insert the causal neural architecture of a couple or a distributed dynamical system. In this case, a neural architecture. And it assumes a series of specific relationships between the cortices and uses a Bayesian model for comparison between the procedures to compare models on the time series, the brain activity we get, and we fit into the model. So what we did is we defined 6 nodes in the brain to basically calculate this model with the neural mass information based on a lot of papers started by Marta Garrido in 2008 and moving forward. And these are the auditory cortex as expected. It's an auditory task. The superior temporal gyrus that has been shown systematically to be a very strong aspect of a mismatch. And then the inferior frontal gyrus has also been captured as a specific aspect of target detection and these type of things. And what we have here is it's all of the possible models that we created to see what's going on. Andate ahora, Chile. Ciao. Fuera. Sí. Sorry, guys. I also have my kids at home. The models we created are a series of models that are that are really interesting, and what we wanted to capture is what is the information coming from. So I'm gonna show you in a simpler version there. When we calculated all these models, the winning model of that compare in Bayesian statistics against all of the other models, when you're hearing the sound that is deviant, is a model that has the both auditory cortex, the information coming into the auditory cortex, superior temporal gyrus and inferior temporal gyrus on the right. So again, this is repeating previous results we had from other papers and from other people in another task. So this was a expected model, and we got it both if you pay attention and you don't pay attention. What was fairly new is to model the actual evidence of the silence. And what we got there was more interesting because we had this sort of series of models, as you can see here, where the input is not really in the auditory cortex. So, well, where is the input coming from if there is silence? There is no brain, there is no auditory input. So how do we model it? Well, we let it run slightly freer, right? And what happened is that the winning models are were the models that have the input. There is no input, right? The input in the inferior frontal gyrus. They clearly are living from an expectancy memory point of view outside the inferior frontal gyrus, somewhere higher order if you want. We can discuss that. And the interesting thing is that the same model won for attention and no attention. So we further model this and we capture something that I think is very interesting, which is we took the winning models and we let the parameters of the information between nodes run free. And when we did that, we got the winning model for when you hear a different sound, so the violation is a sound, and when the violation is a silence, the winning model is the model between all of the possible, interesting combination that we have information going up and down between the nodes, is the one that has the backward, if you want, level of influence, effective connectivity, they call it in dynamical causal modeling, which is the classic top-down, right? So in our expectations, at least our hypothesis was more related that maybe it's going to be this one, the frontal to the temporal, but not necessarily all of them, right? We thought maybe the winning model will not necessarily be the one that it has everything there. Maybe it will be this one. Actually, that was my preferred one. I thought this was going to win, but that one won. And the same thing happened here. The one that won, the one that explains the difference between paying attention and not pay attention to the violation of a silence, is the one that has the information flow coming from downstream, which I think it sort of validates this idea of the top-down aspect of attention and precision on the hierarchy of prediction processes. And again, I'm happy to be challenged on that. And then in the last 2 minutes before I close my 30 minutes, I want to tell you about the experiment we did again with a global local, but this time we make the people have a joystick. When you have a joystick, we ask you to basically express with the joystick how likely you think is a violation to happen. So you might be in a block where you hear beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop, beep 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 boop. So you hear the first beep 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 boop, and you're saying, okay, no, I don't expect anything. So beep 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 beep. Okay, maybe it will come next one. Beep 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 beep. Oh, it didn't come this time. I'm gonna even most likely the next one. So you go further and further with the joystick. We are asking you to explicitly define what we captured before with a CNV, with this slow drift information. So this time, for people who work in evidence accumulation, what we're doing is we're trying to have the behavioral output of your expectancy of the target to come. So this is like the evidence is accumulating towards toward the violation. The more it doesn't come, the more you should expect to come. And now, when you do that in normal people, you get a lovely variety of things. You get people like they here at the bottom with a great, series of each dot is a response. So you get a very clear, prediction that goes towards much higher, prediction when you hear the fourth beep 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 beep, beep and you still didn't get your violation, your beep 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 beep, beep, you're sort of definitely, expecting to happen, and that's how you see the distribution of the numbers, very very clear towards the end. But then you have people who don't have a very clear. In fact, this guy is completely dichotomous, and it doesn't change too much between the first beep beep beep, beep the second beep beep beep, or the fourth beep beep beep. So now what we're saying is what we assume at the neural level to be an obvious thing. Oh, this is a very simple task, and if you pay attention, you are predicting this. Well, not so true. There is again a lovely brutal differences between people, even if most of them do have a behavioral output of prediction, explicit prediction. Is sort of taking you back and saying, well, let's stop assuming that the neural behavior, the neural prediction, layers and hierarchy, between people is relatively systematic, because the behavior is already telling us, be careful, guys. So these are results from a few months ago, and then we have some neural results from this task that we doing the coding and getting the CNV. But again, first, I don't have time to give you a lot of results on this, and second, the actual final analysis, which is pre-registered, it's coming forward in the summer. So you'll be able to see that bioarchives, hitting you very soon in August or September, because everything is pre-written except the results, because everything is pre-registered. So I'm going to wrap up because I think I'm almost there, or probably a minute late. I told you about attention, modulating neural markers of auditory prediction, at least at 3 levels. So mismatch P3 CNV, or if you want in hierarchy. So what you attend, modulates the prediction in a stronger manner. So you have this sort of, aspect of whether you are actually predicting something at the second level, you get a different P300, or at the third level, you're actually predicting what's coming in the next few seconds, not what changed, but what is coming to you. Then I told you about the attention, processes, on the silence, and the feedback that we get, from that model is the actual, feedback information coming from the frontal cortex, that it signals the differences between paying attention to the task or not paying attention to the task when we model this at the brain level. And then I told you about the explicit predictions modulating the neural predictive processes, signatures, and how that it's a word of caution, and we'll see the relationship to the neural. So thanks you very much.
Thank you, Tristan. Very interesting presentation. And you were actually perfect on time also. So I already see one hand raised by Floris. So Floris, you can go ahead and ask.
Okay, thank you, Yamil. Thanks, Tristan, for that wonderful talk. I have a question about the omission. I thought that was really, so it's a very convincing omission response. And in the animal literature, they also see these omission responses, for example, in reward-related structures, right? Like when the animal expects a reward and you omit it, you get a strong dip in responding. So sort of, and in that field, they interpret that as a clear sign of a reward prediction error that is signed. So I was curious why you think that you're looking at a pure prediction signal rather than also just a prediction error signal as the reward prediction error people in the dopamine neurons interpret it.
Yeah, so I agree to a certain degree. So I think that when you don't have reward, then it's difficult to assign an obvious sign to the prediction in the direct simple manner that is defined in the reward literature, because there's nothing to gain or lose for you. So so in that sense, I think there's a higher order aspect of reward or punishment that you get in this sort of actual learning paradigms that is slightly different from something that happens automatically and is modulated by what you do cognitively. That's one side. The other side is that I don't think there are pure predictions. I think there's a form of words in a simple manner in a matter of speak, but I think there's always prediction and prediction errors. What what we call pure prediction in this case is the pure prediction of something that was not coming from outside. It was just coming from inside. So it's an actual sort of a reflection of the system to something that didn't happen. But again, this about the biological level happens all the time, right? What is interesting is that we managed to see how it's modulated by attention, which was actually our main goal, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I agree with you, but we can have a longer talk about reward prediction error, very different from non-reward ones some other time.
No, that's true. Yeah, but I think the timing of your response also was more suggestive to me as an error response, and I think error responses can also come from within. So I don't think that internal versus external is necessarily the distinction between predictions versus errors. So in that sense, but maybe it's just a matter of terminology. I'm just curious about this. But yeah, thanks for your thought. Yeah.
Thank you, Floris. Now we have a couple of questions in the Q&A also. So I'll read the first one from Luisa Bogarts. Have you ever looked at the correlation between the individual's CMV and their signaling in their expectation with the joystick? Do these things measure the same thing? And also, is there any visual feedback from the joystick?
There is no visual feedback from the joystick, and we haven't looked yet at because the statistical models we define the registrations, we're building it to be able to test it. When I said, I'm going to show you some results from this week, was actually this week. So next week and the following, Santiago will be actually doing these sort of funky regressions to look at the neural relationship with the joystick, trial per trial, person per person.
Thank you. Now we have a question from the audience. How allowed to talk? So, Jacek, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Sorry, you can ask your question. Jacek from the audience. In the meantime, I'll go with another Q&A from Jamie Rayleigh. Is there a relationship between the sensory prediction and the dopaminergic prediction error neurons described by Wolfram Schultz?
I think that Floris could answer that, as he brought it up first, about it. I really don't know. I mean, I think that you could possibly model the dopaminergic neurons the same way we model the dopaminergic neurons. And I think that the sensory prediction or prediction error, what we deal with, it's a conceptual blanket that you can apply at the neural level to any type of neuron. Of course, there will be dopaminergic neurons involved, even in this very simple, auditory series of predictions, but they don't seem to be the main ones. The auditory prediction don't seem to be so much obviously modulated by pro or anti-dopaminergic drugs as opposed to other drugs.
Thank you, Tris. Any other question from the audience? Please, if you want to ask, use the raise hands feature. Otherwise, I cannot find you and unmute you. Let's give it another try. If you want to ask now, Daisy. I still don't hear anything. Okay, we have another question from the Q&A. You read this one. From Giovanni Mento. Hi, Tristan. To what extent is the prediction-related CMV modulation related to the task specifically, sensory versus motor task? Is there a sort of basic prediction-based level underlying any possible task-related additional component?
We hopefully will be able to answer that question because we will be calculating the predictions without the joystick before in the first series of blocks. Then the second series of blocks, the person comes and does the joystick, so we get the explicit prediction. And then the third series of blocks, the person goes back to do the one without the joystick, but now has done the joystick. So now it's again, the stimuli is the same, but now what the person knows because has done the task is different. So we'll be able to do cross decodings between that idea of the higher order, expectancy effect of the first task, then the explicit with the joystick, and then the one that comes back to be the first one, but with the knowledge before. I hope I can answer you soon. Again, tune in for the bioarchives.
Yeah, I guess we're all curious to see that work out soon. There's another in the Q&A by Jamie O'Reilly. If perception is a predictive process, what does this tell us about consciousness?
All right. I don't know if I can answer shortly. I can say predictive processes in the widest sense can accommodate all cognition. That's the claim, and I would sort of disagree. But the disagreement will come from a clash of theoretical frameworks that maybe we don't have a lot of time to discuss. What I would say is that it seems to be there is some degree of requirement uh, for conscious processing on a particular level for us to capture that particular process. So maybe when you're paying attention and being conscious of the stimuli, there's another other series in the hierarchy of the predictive processes that seems to be active, that they are not active, or that they're active in a different manner when you are processing without conscious perception. So that we have seen. So hopefully that can capture the differences. Whether I guess that's why Lucia now is raising her hand. She probably wants to comment and discuss on that.
Please jump in, Lucia.
Actually, I wasn't. I was going to ask you a question completely unrelated.
All right. Yeah, and ask me the question because I don't want to answer Martin, who's in the question and answer. We have a beef. I'll answer anyway, but
So shall I ask, or do you want to?
I'll go for it. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I was. I think that your P300 results are super interesting, but it's also puzzling that you find them only when there is attention, when we know that statistical learning sometimes doesn't require attention. So sometimes I have a hard time putting these two things together. It could be that your sequences are too long. I'm just trying to understand why this is the case when we know that statistical learning can happen in a passive way, right? So
yeah. So I'll answer it in the way the global task was created was to require attention to get a P3. So the way in those months that I was sort of piloting in 2007, what I wanted is to make sure that we had a very strong P300 you could get in one person and in a single subject statistics that will be there if you pay attention, not there if you don't pay attention. That doesn't mean that there are gradations. There are people who say, oh no, a sustained P3 cannot happen if you're not conscious and paying attention completely. And there will be people who disagree, who don't think this is a process that is all or none. And we will be also in that front. I think you can create a series of P300 like ones without attention that has a monotonical sort of increase, specifically with statistical learning. So P3 is a type of signal that we see this thing, but that doesn't mean that signal the same process, right? At the neural level, I mean. And that's why I think that's the conceptual explanation.
Yeah, so I guess what I was trying to ask is, do you understand the lack of this P3 as if the subjects have not learned the higher order structure? That's what I'm getting at, right? So what does the lack of a P3 mean?
Yeah. So the lack of P3 means this, exactly that. So in the subjects who do the task passively, not the people who are doing a visual task in interference, those cannot get it. But the people who do the task passively, sometimes if you do group analysis, you see nothing. But you see, if you do single subject analysis, you see a small sort of P3, right? Then you go back and actually do the single trial analysis. And you start to see that by the end of the final block, the person seems to have some sort of P3 to the global structure, right? And then when you do the interview, and we have done this task, I don't know, 150 people. So we know that when the people, you start to ask them, tell me about the task in a very open manner, those who sort of have hints of that there was a structure, etc., usually are the ones that you see a little blip of a P3. But again, that's why also we stop doing the task in the passive manner, because passive is too variable. That's why you end up doing the task only with pay attention or pay attention to this visual demanding thing. Because that what happens is you start to extract information from the task.
Good. Well, I guess that we have time for just one more question, but Martin, Wookie, I would ask you if you could keep yours for the roundtable at the end, because it involves more than one speaker. And also Emily Coffey already tried a couple of times to ask, so I will go with that question now, which is, there is some evidence from the animal literature that prediction signals start lower down in the auditory hierarchy than the auditory cortex. I'm curious if you think that the model would be more informative, complete, including subcortical areas for these kind of predictions, or if these are purely cortical processes.
No. I mean, I fully agree, Emily.
Emily.
There is results in the literature pointing towards a very clear signal that we later becomes the mismatch in the thalamus and the superior colliculus. So we know it starts earlier. The question is whether our task it can be captured at that level, because our task has these sort of embedded sequences. So maybe that's a question to discuss afterwards. When our task was done in animals and we had electrodes in the thalamus, it was done sort of in a few animals only, and then COVID started, so we had problems. We didn't capture our particular sort of mismatch like first level in those animals. But again, they were sedated and there were only a couple. So hopefully we will start again this collaboration, and I'll be able to answer you, truthfully, and then we can do a model which includes more levels of hierarchy, more real sensory ones.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Tristan and people, for your questions.